Hello, everyone. We are live on YouTube. I'm quite sure of that. Facebook, and I hope X. I'm hoping that we're live on X. I have no way of checking that,
I
but
can check.
maybe, yeah, you can check. Maybe in the comments, I can actually tell where people are writing from. And I see we've got already people in the comments writing. Great to see. We've got our friend Alan, who's been on several of these live streams from St. Louis. Good to see you. Yes, I think you sent me a St. Louis Cardinals hat a while ago. That was awesome. So great to see you here. And yeah, if anybody watching, let us know where you're from. As I always say too, let us know if the sound is okay. We want to make sure you can hear both of us. Today we're going to be talking about the ESV English Standard Version 2025 update, looking at some examples of changes they made, and also kind of trying to answer this question: how often should a Bible translation be updated, if at all? That'll be the topic, and I'm thrilled to have as my co-host back after quite a while, but he is back, Nicholas, and Nicholas is coming to us from the
Plymouth
future.
Valley.
From the future,
Yeah.
he's way ahead of me. What time is it where you are?
It is currently 3 minutes past 9.
But fortunately, Nicholas doesn't sleep.
It's a well-established fact.
Yeah, you're over in Ireland, so I really appreciate you joining us late your time. But it's just afternoon where I am, and I know other people watching. It's probably like 1 o'clock. So we got a wide range of time zones we're covering here. But Nicholas, you're a layman apologist. It did come up when I originally had
It was
our
there, yeah.
scene up there. It was there.
hmm
And so, layman apologist, is that a new thing, or have you been
No.
known by that for a
So,
while?
yeah, it's pretty new, but first of all, I just want to say, Tim, thanks for having me back on. I think it's been close to nearly 2 years since I've been on the channel with you. Maybe not quite 2 years, but it's coming up on it. So Tim and I have kept in contact. We've been talking back and forth. So yeah, it's great to be back on the channel, and it's great to see all the regulars in the chat as well. But yeah, no, layman apologist. Pardon me. Layman apologist is more new. About maybe 2024, I decided I was going to take my old Twitter account and delete it and start a brand new one. And I was like, I'm passionate about apologetics. I love talking about apologetics, and I'm passionate about seeing young people get involved in it. So what can I do? I know I'll start a new X account, and I'll primarily focus here because I'll be honest, X is the place it's at for all the hot topic conversations.
Are we on X actually? Are we?
We
Are
are,
we?
yes, we're live.
Yes.
Now there is
Club
a delay,
X.
but there is a delay, but it's not. It's I think maybe about 10-15 seconds, maybe.
That's okay. That's,
Yeah.
I think, pretty common.
hmm
Um, Great. And I'm noticing here we've got England, so closer to where you are. And then we've
Same
got,
time zone, anyway.
so nice to see you from England. And then we've got someone from Kentucky. Very nice. So kind of the middle of our country here, a little bit
hmm
south. Awesome. I love to see the variety. I know everybody is joining because of this topic. And by the way, I'm going to credit Nicholas. You came up with the topic. So thank you
hmm
for thinking of this. And if this doesn't go well, we're blaming you.
Blame
Um,
me. Yeah. It's okay.
but
I'll just blame Crossway.
there
So.
you go. Blame Crossway. Yeah. So um, we are going to be looking at the textual changes
hmm
that are on this document right here, everyone. It's ESV Text Edition 2025. As we go through this, so we're not going to have time to hit on all of the changes, but I will say most of these are actually fairly minor changes.
Very minor.
But we're going to try to hit on the big ones, or ones that are actually important theologically. And if you have any questions in the audience as we go along, or any thoughts that you have on all this, we love to see what your thoughts are. If you have a
Mhm.
question, you could always put question, just so that catches our eye. Just write question and then write your question. And then another thing that I'm sure everybody is thinking about is we said we were going to do a Bible giveaway. And I'm going to keep letting people have time to get into this live stream before I give the directions on how to enter the giveaway. But here it is, the New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs in the ESV. I chose this Bible for a giveaway today because we're talking about the English Standard Version translation. So I decided we'll give away an ESV. And just so you know, Nicholas and I plan to do more live streams. We'll be giving away more Bibles. As a matter of fact, the next time we do this, I plan to give away Nicholas's favorite translation. I think it's your favorite translation, the New American
It's
Standard
yeah,
Bible 95.
yeah.
That's your
The
favorite.
NASB 95 is up there for me. It's been one of my most consistently used Bibles, and I know, Tim, whenever we first met, you were shocked because I think you maybe thought that we don't tend to use the NASB over here, and that's been something that I've found consistently. I think a lot of people are shocked that the NASB is popular outside of America. So yeah.
Well, I have to say, I was going to thank you for being willing to, be with me today
Yep.
on all these social media platforms. I didn't know if it was a little bit of a risk for you to be associating with an American these days.
To be honest, I might just get arrested for anything I tweet anyway. So we're all good.
Americans are a little bit under the gun right now, a little bit under the spotlight. Just we do tend to draw attention a little bit.
Ah, it's not a bad thing. I think. To be honest, I think a lot of Americans would probably be surprised to know that the support they do have in places like Ireland and the UK and stuff. So yeah, don't believe what all the media tells you, folks. Simple as.
That's right. But kind of case in point, you like the New American Standard Bible. Therefore, you're not afraid to associate with Americans.
Nope.
So we have Sky Everlasting from South Australia. That's
Oh
quite a
wow.
ways away from where I am, and as then someone a little closer to home where I am is Virginia. So great! Thanks everyone for telling us where you are, and great to see that everything's working. So I'll get to the Bible giveaway instructions fairly early in the conversation here, but I do kind of want to get the ball rolling a little bit. Um, and maybe just ask the audience, get kind of read the temperature of the room a little bit, what everybody thinks about this. I've been seeing a lot of a lot of comments and conversation online and videos already done about the ESV
Hmm.
2025 update. So uh, let me just ask you, Nicholas, just in general, what was your initial reaction to this news? Were you okay with it, or did you have a negative or positive reaction?
I wouldn't say I had a negative reaction to it, but nor would I say my initial reaction was positive either. I think rightly so whenever it comes to the topic of like Bible updates, Bible revisions. Sometimes I think it sets people's teeth on edge, and we'll get into some of the reasons why it does tend to do that. But I think what it boiled down to is the ESV has now it was established in 2001, and I believe we've had this is going to be now like its fourth, maybe fifth update. Um, which is not a bad thing on the face of it, but I think whenever you word it that way, it can make people feel a little bit anxious, and it certainly made me feel a little bit like, oh, I don't know about that. But going through this, looking at the document and seeing what has actually been updated, it's not that minor. And in fact, there's one place in particular I'm actually very grateful for the update, but we'll get to that as we go through the document.
Now, you said it's not minor, or I may have misunderstood what I heard you say.
Probably me and my fast accent. So the majority of these changes are, punctuation or word order, and in a few places, it may seem like a big change, but
Hmm.
it's really not. However, there's one area where I think they've made a great improvement, and I'm looking forward to actually discussing about that, because I think the aim of a good revision is to make the text and the footnotes more clear.
Yeah.
And I think in this particular passage, I'm not going to say what it is because I know we'll get to it and we'll go through
Mm.
it. But there's one particular passage in here that I think that's a great revision. That's a great update.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, early on, I know we'll be hitting on the one that everybody has talked about because it's early in the Bible. It's one of the first ones in the document. So that's probably the big one everybody wants to and this is what I would call a somewhat controversial. There's actually been quite a bit of heated discussion online, but Nicholas and
Yep.
I, just so everyone knows, great to see the audience just continues to come in here. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for participating in the live chat. We plan to cover a lot of controversial topics. We're both on X, interacting with people, especially Nicholas, the layman apologist. Check out his platform there on X. He's got a great following and a lot of interactions. So we,
Yeah.
we see a lot of stuff happening. We were just talking about it
Oh yeah.
before we went live. There's a lot of, as people know, a lot of back and forth on X. And one of the reasons we wanted to have this show is to actually have long form conversation about some of these things that we see that are big topics on platforms like that. So stay tuned for more episodes, and we hope to see you all back here. And we'll keep doing some Bible giveaways as well. But
Mhm.
let's get into the document. Let's start looking at
Yeah.
this. And before we even look at any examples, um, my general reaction was not negative. The ESV was first. It first came out in 2001. Uh, I believe they might have done a 2002 tweak to it. Certainly
Oh.
2007 and
Mm-hmm.
2011 and 2016. So to be honest, if everyone kind of tracks backward, this is the longest that they've ever gone without doing an update.
Yeah.
But I will also say that these updates can hardly be called updates. They're really minor revisions, even tweaks, we might call them. It's kind of like if you have a book that's in print, they'll do like maybe a second edition where they'll make some little changes.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's the same translation. They don't have to even put a different number behind it. It's not the ESV 2025. It's still the ESV. So my reaction was, pretty tepid, and I don't really mind, but I understand why people get upset or react the way they do. And I think the big one, which we'll probably address later, is, I mean, don't these changes make it so that we're going to have different editions in our hands when we're at church and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I will say, I went through this document and Nicholas did too. It didn't actually take that long for me to go through it. It's I want to say 60 something words changed. I
So
actually
I made a
have
note
it.
of this.
Yeah, how
Sorry,
many
I was
words?
just
Go
going to
ahead.
say 68 word changes across 42 verses and 57 revised footnotes and punctuation updates.
And there are 757,400 words in the ESV. So actually, if two people were reading this translation, they would have a really hard time finding any differences.
Mm-hmm.
It's 0.00 something percent, I believe, of any changes. So yeah, I don't think it's really that major of a difference, but it has sparked a lot of conversation, and I can see we've got a great audience here. So let's look at some of these. I'm going to be tempted to look at each and every one, but just the first one off the bat, it just shows you here it's a minor change. It's a footnote change. Now, the second example, Genesis 3:16, as well as Genesis 4:7. What's cool about this is they're back to back, and you can actually see
Yep.
they made the same change in both of these verses, which also shows you why they rendered it the way they did in the first place, and that the change that they made, they tried to be careful about making it focused on one particular verse, and it is theologically connected to Genesis 3:16, the
Yep.
curse, right? And so, yeah, let's talk about that. What are your thoughts on Genesis 3:16? It used to say, "Your desire shall be contrary to your husband." That's the 2016 edition.
Yep.
Uh, it has a footnote that says "shall be toward your husband," and
Yep.
now it says "your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you."
Mhm.
So, do you think this is a good change, bad change?
So you and I discussed this behind the scenes.
I know.
I think on the face of it, this is one of these verses that I think, you've already alluded to it. Like, I've already seen multiple articles about it. I've even seen some YouTube videos about it, and in some theological camps, it can cause people that the it can cause the hairs on the back of their neck to stand up. And I understand why I do. Now, what I would say is, in the 2011, I believe, um, I should have done my research on this part, but it originally did say for or toward, because that's quite literally what it does say in
Yeah.
the Hebrew.
Mhm.
However, in the 2016, they made uh, a choice to render it as contrary, because it was set in the context of the curse. So personally, I actually do agree with that. Like, I think that was a good choice that they made. Am I upset that they've switched it back to for or toward your husband? I'm not upset about it, because it's quite literally what it says in the Hebrew. So I actually think it's a good thing. However, I do know, and I can see why it's going to ruffle feathers among certain groups. But to me, this one, like, and as you rightly pointed out, Tim, the great thing about this, and we can do this for the 2016 update, looking back in the 2011 as well, all of these changes, and I even hate using the term changes, so I'm going to stick with the word revision, they're there in plain sight. You can see what's being changed, why it's changed. So, like, nothing's hidden, nothing's secretive about it. And I think that will help put a lot of people's mind at ease, because I think if you're new to this area, especially if maybe you're a new Christian, you can hear, oh, the Bible's been changed, it's been updated, and it causes panic.
Yeah. Well, technically, we're never going to update the Bible because the Bible is in the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek.
Yep.
What we're doing is we're updating translations of the original languages, and so there is a difference there. I will say with this, the Genesis 4:7 rendering also changed from
Mm-hmm.
it says sin is crouching at the door, same Hebrew phrase from what I understand. Its
It is, yeah.
desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. My question is, would people have cared if they had rendered it that way in Genesis 4:7 and Genesis 3:16? If if you weren't even thinking about Genesis 3:16 and you were only focused on Genesis 4:7, I'm curious how many people would have gotten upset. But
Mm-hmm.
because it's talking about men and women, they didn't like the way that it was rendered. And I do understand it wasn't as literal of a rendering,
Yeah.
but I think, and I did a video on it. I think a case could have obviously was made for the rendering that they had. But I think the consensus, I'm even seeing it in the comments, most people really prefer, with anything controversial, just keep it literal.
Yep.
And I get that. The only problem, if you want to call it a problem, is what does it mean that your desire will be toward your husband
Yep.
and he shall rule over you? That is pretty
Mm-hmm.
ambiguous.
Yep.
I don't know. How would you? How
Yeah.
would you? Would you end up explaining it more like what it said in the 2016 edition? You think?
See, this is what I'm not. It's not that I've not thought through this, but I think the reason why I strongly agree with the 2016 rendering is, and that's not to say I disagree with it with the revision they've made,
Mhm.
because ultimately the ESV is it's trying to be a literal translation, so it's rendering it as literal as possible while maintaining readability. So for me, because I see it in context of the curse, and I see then that it's been rendered your desire. If I was to read that, your desire will be toward your husband, but he shall rule over you. I don't. Now, me and you have discussed this behind the scenes, so you can give me your thoughts on this as well, Tim. But I don't know if I initially would read that as something bad in light of the curse. However, then whenever we do move over a chapter and we see how that same phrase, that same word has been used, it's been used in a negative sense. And it's been used that sin is quite literally contrary to you. Its desire is for you. So
Hmm.
I understand why they've gone back to the more literal, because like if people can see here, Tim, I don't know if you can you highlight that document at all? No.
Let me try.
I
Which
was going to
part do
say
you
if
want me
you
to
could
highlight?
highlight, I'm sure people will be able to see it anyway, but if you could highlight the footnote, you can see that it quite
Right here.
literally says, yeah, you can, perfect. It says to, toward, or against. So they're telling you that word, that phrase can still be used in a negative light against your husband, or sin is against you. So ultimately, I think it's not a huge deal. Like, even though this seems like one of the biggest changes, this I think when it boils down to it, it doesn't matter. I just think
Yeah.
some people are going to have particular theological traditions that they're tied to that they
Hmm.
wanted to read contrary to. So to me, although initially I wasn't keen on this one, the more I've thought about it, the more I've looked at it, it's not a huge deal.
Yeah, it really seems to be the consensus. See Cam Hyde in the comments. Good to see you,
Okay,
Cam.
Cam?
And I noticed he said the new rendering is better.
Mm,
So another vote in favor of this. And the new
mm-hmm.
rendering is actually very.
The old?
It's the old rendering. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
controversial because it's going back to what they had before, and it's just a more, we could call it neutral translation. It's kind of a just a literal translation that doesn't try to give any theological um,
Bias.
bias to it, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, I think the rendering is fine. I mean, either way, I wasn't really opposed because again, Genesis 4:27. I think they're just trying to say, how would you say this in English?
Mm,
And sin, if its desire is toward you, then sin wants to master you, right? I think sin wants to have control. Sin wants to have influence.
yeah.
So maybe that's what Genesis 3:16 is saying. And, the
Mm-hmm.
wife, but what is the contrast to that? He shall rule over you.
Yep. Yep.
Now, I think that probably maybe one reason they wanted to put contrary is because, and I can see where this might be a complementarian issue. Like, it's not wrong for the husband to be the head. That's not like a
Yes.
curse.
No.
Whereas when there's some sort of dissension, that's part of the curse.
Yep.
So I think that's all they were trying to do when they made the original change, but they changed
Mm-hmm.
it back. So,
Yeah. And
all
I
right.
think as well, like it's definitely not as major, but like you can even see the but he shall roll over you has now been changed to and he shall roll over you. So like
Hmm.
very, very like minor changes doesn't actually change any meaning or anything of
Yeah.
that like.
Okay, let's keep going here. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to see a lot of footnote changes, and that's another thing. Everybody, I wanted to point out that when we think that there's these changes to the translation, I mean footnotes. It's just really trying to make some improvements in the footnotes. I don't think that's controversial at all. I think
Just bring
everybody,
clarity.
yeah. I mean, even like this one here, SEO was about 7 and they put 7.7. I mean, they're trying to be
Yep.
very, very accurate here.
Yep.
Um, One thing I did notice uh, is Exodus 20:11. In 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth. And a few times, at least a couple times, they changed verses from
Yep.
heaven to the heavens and the earth.
Yep.
Again, really not that controversial, but it's a little bit more significant than the footnote changes.
Mm-hmm.
This one seems pretty obvious to me why they made the change.
Yep.
I believe I looked up the Hebrew. It's probably one of those words like Elohim too. It can be singular or plural. You could render
Yep.
it either way. Technically, I think it's a plural ending. It doesn't seem wrong to translate it the heavens. I think they did it because when people hear the word heaven, they think the place of God's abode.
Yep.
They're thinking of heaven with the angels and the throne of God.
Yep.
So they wanted to clarify this is talking about the realm of the heavens,
Yeah,
right?
like the sky, the
Yeah,
atmosphere, like yeah.
yeah. So minor change, but to me it brings
Yep.
more clarity. Um, so I think so far I'm trying to keep. Yeah, people are agreeing, and nobody's. See, this isn't so bad. Um, oh, I
Just
like
wait till
this
we get to
one.
the
I
more
like this
controversial
one.
topics.
They changed the heading here from social justice
Yeah.
to a just community.
Yeah.
What
So I'm
What do you
glad
think
you
of that
pointed
one?
that out because hang on, where's my camera? I have a note made for that one specifically, so I'm glad to hear you saw the same thing.
Tell us what you were thinking when you read that.
To be honest, I think obviously things have changed a lot politically in this last while,
Yeah.
and I think that particular heading, while it's got nothing to do with the modern idea of social justice, I think the translation committee here probably thought, you know what, there's probably a better way to say this rather than talking about social justice, rather than to change it now to what they have, which is laws for a just community, because I think it would be very easy to go in, read that, and I'm not saying everybody would do this, but I have certainly, because you see all sorts on X, that's primarily where you'll find me. A lot of people have brought this out and said, "See, the Bible talks about social justice." It's like, well, first of all, that's a subheading, but second of all, we'll get into that at a later date. So, no, I just thought it was interesting that I don't know if that's the particular reason, but I would assume that's the reason why there's.
I think a lot of these changes are about how is a person in our moment that we're living in going to read all of this. And in that case, they were just looking for anything that might be
Yep.
misunderstood. And yeah, the word social justice carries a lot of baggage right now. Um,
Yeah, you could say that again.
Yeah. So a just community, just so we're clear on that. We're not talking about, although social justice isn't bad if you define it in terms of
No.
biblical categories.
Yeah, I think it's just the modern day baggage that comes with that phrase. Like if you were to say that, I think most people would jump to, you know, a political topic versus, laws for an actual just community.
Oh, look at this comment from Nate. Meaning of words and phrases change. Social justice is now a false friend. Oh, bringing in Mark Ward's
I was going to say a Mark Ward friend
concept there.
here.
I like that. This is why frequent updates are good. Ooh, we got a fan of frequent updates. You're going to make people angry with that, Nate.
Mm,
But actually, I'm kind of later. I want to talk about why frequent updates can be good.
yep.
Uh, but I'll explain later. Let me pause now because I want to make sure I get to this. And thank you everybody for hanging around and uh, writing your comments in the live chat. If you want to know how to have a chance to win this Bible, we have this ESV New Testament Psalms and Proverbs that we're giving away. And so for this one, all you need to do is whenever you're watching this, a lot of you are watching live, write to a fresh perspective at gmail.com. And in the subject line, put ESV New Testament. That's all you have to do to have your name entered into the drawing. I use a random choice generator, and I put in everybody who has entered. And next week, I plan to announce it on social media. I'll try to put it out there, but I also email the people that have won. So even if you miss the social media post, I'm going to email the winners or the winner of this one, but in future winners emailed as well. So
Hmm.
anyway, that's the Bible. I've done a review of this, so a lot of you have probably seen it. It's really cool because it's a single column text. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera. It's probably, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Really nice letting. The space between the lines is really good. It's beautiful format. And it's got the Psalms, Proverbs in the back here. Ooh, really nice. So
And it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, that's gold headings, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Not real gold, but
Yeah.
yeah. So that's how you enter to win a chance, or to enter for a chance to win the ESV with the New Testament Psalms and Proverbs. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled conversation now.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll get back to this document here. We have a significant one, or at least one that I think people would question coming up here, and it's Exodus 34:23. Notice in the previous, it's capital LORD and then God, lowercase for the second two letters, and now you actually have that reversed. Uh, Now you probably know, Nicholas, why they made this change. Are you aware, or do you have a guess?
No, not in this one particularly, because this is one, believe it or not. Although I scanned through this document, I didn't actually clock this one, so I'm going to be
Okay.
relying on you here, Tim.
Yeah.
No, I do know the significance of the words and why it's capitalized, but yeah, I don't know why they've leaned in that direction.
So this is one of those things, and I'll probably repeat this in the program today. The I believe this is true for this, but it's definitely true for other texts.
Hmm.
One of the reasons that updates like this need to be made in the ESV is because the translation committee didn't produce the base translation. This translation is an update of the Revised Standard Version. So my personal belief is that they're going through, and as the years go by, they catch these little things that are vestigial leftovers from the
Yep.
RSV. Now, I'm not 100% sure that's true with this, but I think it is.
Hmm.
The RSV probably had capital LORD. So when you see capital LORD, all caps, that signifies normally Yahweh.
Yep.
But the issue is in the Greek, that word there that comes first is Adon. As in Adonai, we think of the
Hmm.
word Lord, which usually isn't capitalized. And the second word is Elohim.
Hmm.
No, I'm sorry. No. Yahweh. It's Adon Yahweh. So the question is, if you're going to use Lord for Yahweh, but you already have Adonai or Adon in front, then what do? You're not going to say Lord, Lord. So they needed to put Lord in lowercase for
Yep.
Adonai or Adon in this case, and then
Hmm.
capital letters for God, even though it's actually Yahweh. Now, the LSB has it easy in this case. They can just put Lord
The
Yahweh.
Lord Yahweh. Yeah. Yep.
So there you go. That's the explanation of that, in case anybody wondered. I
So,
hope
so,
I
so you
explained that
think
well
then
enough.
that they're catching
Yeah.
they're going back and looking at the RSV. I think that's
Yes.
interesting because I don't know how many people know, but like the ESV does come from the tradition of RSV. Despite what King James onlyists like to say about this, it does come from the KJV and also the Tyndale as well. So it's in that family line.
Yes. Exactly. And there's grammar changes that I'm noticing as we go along here that are really just trying to make improvements from the RSV. So
Mm-hmm.
just very, very minor things in quite a few of these verses. Now,
Yep.
Deuteronomy 32:17, this one said they sacrificed to demons that were no gods.
Yep.
And now it reads, they sacrificed to demons that were not God. Again, this rendering here was in the RSV,
Yep.
but now they've changed it to not God.
Yep.
And the word behind that is actually the singular Eloha,
Yep.
not Elohim. So, I mean, obviously, Elohim is also God. It really is contextual, but
Yeah.
it is a singular word. So I thought that's interesting that the RSV rendered it as gods.
I think it has more to do with the theological implication, because obviously we read in the New Testament obviously too, but more so in the Old Testament, because this is where Mormons love to go down this track of there are beings known as gods in the Old Testament, but they are not God in the way that God is God.
Mhm.
So I think whenever previously it was rendered they sacrificed the demons that were no gods, it's talking about the gods of the nations, but yet I, I don't agree with everything this guy said. But Michael Heiser, great scholar, check out his YouTube channels or his YouTube videos if you want. But I think he rendered this really well one time whenever he said there are Elohim, divine beings, who are not Elohim, meaning they are not the God, the Most High God. So, and if that's confusing anybody, because I know if you're new to this and you hear that, by no means are we saying there's multiple gods, or I'm saying there's multiple gods. I should say there's only one true God, but it's because in the Old Testament, the gods of the nations, which were demons or idols, they were referred to as gods. So, yeah, to me, there, I think that one's more just trying to make it clearer that these demons are not God in nature. Like their nature is not a god. That would be
Mm.
my view in that one.
You're you're saying that's why they rendered it that way originally in the RS?
No, I'm
Oh,
saying
oh.
yeah. So the no gods previously, I believe they rendered that because of the theological view that yes, the gods of the nations were considered gods, but they are not the one true God.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, so I think someone in the comments probably it's agreed it's a good change. I think
Very good. It brings clarity.
most translations, I think, if not all of them, render it not God. So, so
Mhm.
yeah, that's again, it's not very controversial. Um, there's one that I think is kind of funny that I want to skip down to. If you want me to go back though, I can do that. But let me
No,
see if
you're
I
okay.
can
Just let me know what
find.
page number you're going
This
to.
is going to be okay. So this is page 7, I guess.
7. Okay.
Nehemiah 10:31. I wanted everyone to see. So there's a lot of just footnote changes. Again, things that aren't that major, and then you get to
Yeah.
Nehemiah 10:31. The end of the verse: "We will forgo the crops of the seventh year and the exaction of every debt." It's changed from this spelling with an e to "We will forego the crops of the seventh
Yes.
year." And
Yeah.
now, are you aware of why they changed it, or
This
no?
one.
This
Yeah.
is
No.
funny. All right, I get to be nerdy. I'm going to
Yeah.
show
You get to
everybody.
tell me. Yeah.
This is so funny. I wanted to look this one up, and I'd love to hear what if anybody already knew this. I'll give you a hint though. We sometimes will talk about something being a foregone conclusion. So
Hmm.
there's actually a difference between forego with a e and forego without an e.
Yeah.
And here's
Okay.
what the Merriam-Webster article said: although forego with an e and forego have distinct meanings, forego meaning to go before and forego meaning to do without. Now in that verse, it means we're going to do without the
Yeah.
crops.
Yeah.
Um, so let me go back here. Sorry, and it says it is not uncommon to find forego with an e in place of forego. Most standard dictionaries find such use acceptable. So it's actually
Yeah.
you technically can use it both ways.
Yeah.
Despite this semantic differentiation by the presence or absence of the middle e, forego and forego have been used interchangeably for centuries. Current usage evidence, however, indicates that forego without an e is more frequent in print as a standard verb in all of its inflected forms. Basically, they're saying that in a technical sense, historically,
Yeah.
it would be better to write it without the e
Hmm.
if you mean to go without.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
But you
there you
see,
go.
the interesting thing there is though, but like, I hope this will show the audience like how minor that is, because to be honest, I automatically read that as forgo to go without.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
you
Yeah.
know, again, it's still a good change, and I think yeah, the point of the revision is to bring clarity, and if those are things like obviously those topics of discussion are coming up for someone, for the fact that they're even looking at these things, and Nate. and his comment earlier talked about, the frequent updates being good. I think they are good because, like, the more and more we study the manuscripts that we have, the more and more evidence we find that, okay, maybe this was worded that way or it had a different usage. And yeah, just even
Mhm.
in our English here, you can see the change of, with an E versus without an E.
But it shows you too, like when people hear update, they think, oh no, it's gonna, I mean, no one's going to notice, especially if you're reading out loud. It sounds the
No.
same.
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
really minor. And then we have a lot of footnotes that I've noticed changing unknown to uncertain.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Which,
what do you think?
well, I was going to say, I think some people would initially go, oh, well, that's pretty much the same thing, but realistically, it's not, because for something to be unknown means you don't know at all. Basically, like, it's completely unknown versus something that's uncertain. Like, we have theories to what it might be, or like this has been suggested. We'll not even get into these right now because I think we'll be here all day. But like, what's the animals that some translations suggest the footnotes again, like crocodile and hippopotamus?
Oh, are you saying on this verse?
No,
I'm sorry.
so sorry, I'm looking at page 8, where it talks about large animal, exact identity unknown. It's talking about Leviathan and Behemoth.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see
Yeah,
Leviathan here.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
As where, like, I
Oh,
think
yeah.
some
Behemoth.
translations I
Yep. I
can't
see it
think
now.
off.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, some I can't think off the top of my head, but in the footnotes they would, you know, put a theory out there that this may be a crocodile, this may be a hippo, however. So yeah, it sounds minimal, and it really is, but there is a difference between, exact identity unknown versus exact identity uncertain.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows you they're tweaking things. They're trying to make it more exact.
Yep.
It's so minor. Some would call it pedantic to even point out these things, but hey, that's what linguists do, right? I mean, they want to make it as clear as possible.
Yep.
And when you say something's unknown, yeah, I think I look that up. It tends to mean a lack of data. When you
Yeah.
say something's unknown, you don't have the data, whereas uncertain means you have the data, but you haven't determined what the conclusion of the data is. I mean, it's a
Yep.
technical minor thing, but
Yeah.
yep. Okay, now I think as you go along here, there's a lot of those types of changes, footnote changes. So there was one here though that this was the only one that I found that I didn't understand. They took the quotation marks out of Psalm 11, 1 to 3.
Yeah.
And I looked up the other translations and they all the ones that are modern and use quotation marks have quotation marks. I couldn't understand why they would take them out. So this one is perplexing. Did you even happen to notice this one?
I did, because if you notice, at where it says flee, they've put a wee little red line at the quotation mark to show you that's what's been changed. So I did notice it. But
Mhm.
I don't know. The only thing I could suggest is, because, like, I don't have any references on hand, as unless they don't know what they're referencing and that's why they've changed it.
Yeah, that one was perplexing to me because whenever you say someone is talking other than
Yeah.
you often put quotation marks. And this one, I mean, it's not a big deal. You can write quotation marks in there yourself if it really matters
Mm,
to you. And I don't know, that was the only one. So if anybody in the comments can think of any reason, you can look this up and or if there happens to be a translator here, uh, let us know if you have any insight. But that's the only one I found that I couldn't figure out an answer to it. Uh, in Psalm 119, they
yeah.
added "O Lord." In the
Hmm.
RSV, I think this was from the RSV originally. They didn't even have Lord.
Yeah.
And you already know probably why they added it, right?
Yeah. Just goes back to finding we have earlier manuscripts now that do include it. So we
Okay.
see where it's included in certain manuscripts now. I don't
Okay.
have the exact name of the manuscripts on hand, but I did look this up, and we have quite early evidence that it did include "Give me life, O Lord."
Yeah, it's certainly in the interlinears,
Yeah.
that I was looking up, that
Hmm.
specifically I should say, on Blue Letter Bible, whatever they're currently using, they do have Yahweh in there, and so it's
Yep.
just reflecting what's in the Hebrew text there, at least
Hmm.
like you said, what based on the information we currently have.
Yeah,
Um,
because I think it's important to note, just while we're on that topic, like the ESV in the Old Testament is based on the Masoretic text, but it does have some allusions to the Septuagint, and it does have some Dead Sea Scrolls references in there, like whether they're in the footnote or whether they have, but they haven't included a footnote there. But that would be my understanding of why they have changed that to read, "Give me life, O Lord."
yep.
So
Yeah, and again, the RSV was cutting edge in the 1950s, to the 1970s. They updated it in 71, but I mean, it's actually kind of a dated translation.
yeah.
So I feel like a lot of these changes really are not controversial. Um, anyway, there is a theological one that we need to get to, so I'm going to skip down to it.
Hmm.
Everybody's waiting. If they're familiar with the changes, we'll go to the New Testament now.
I think you're going to the one I want to talk about.
Yeah, you want to talk about the Gospel of John, right?
Yes, you're correct. Actually,
Okay,
I just
I'm
had to
almost
check
there.
my
Here
notes.
we go. I found it. All right. So the previous edition said, "No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." The footnote says, "The only one who is God." Some manuscripts, "The only Son."
Hmm.
Now, "No one has ever seen God, God the only Son, who is at the Father's side." And it says, "Or seen God, the only God." Some manuscripts, "Seeing God, the only Son." So they
Hmm.
kind of almost combine the two.
Yep.
God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, he has made him
Yep.
known.
Yep. And even there, like they have a little footnote in the footnote about Greek rendering it in the bosom of the Father as well. So part of the reason why I think this is a fantastic revision and update is it brings, now I'll say what I'm going to say first, and then I'll add that in. It brings great clarity to the fact that the Son is not the Father and the Father is not the Son, yet it identifies the Son as God. So it brings great theological clarity. Now, what I was going to say is, if you know your Bible well, you know that it's a Trinitarian work from start to finish.
Hmm.
However, this change now, I think, has made excellent clarity to the point that there is distinction within the Godhead, there is distinction of persons. As where I think previously, it's not that you couldn't get distinction of persons there, but whenever you read, "No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known," that to me is clear. Okay, but the update's even clearer. It makes it much sharper.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to say, because I was studying this fairly recently, it is a textual variation. Some texts have the only begotten God, and some say the only begotten Son.
Yep.
And yeah, you get into all those theories as to what, would a scribe more likely change it to Son? The harder reading is the only begotten God. That's kind of the
Hmm.
arguments you'll see there. But I think at the end of the day, what's clear in what John is saying is he is referencing the Word who became
Yep.
flesh, the only
Yeah, in verse
begotten,
14.
which is the Son. That
Yep.
whether he explicitly put that in there, that's what he's referring to. The only begotten who is God. And
Hmm.
so it's certainly a valid rendering to say God, the only Son, because begotten is the only. Like that's what it means to be begotten, is to be an only son. So it's
Yep.
implied at very least, if not outright stated. Even if that word huios isn't stated, it's certainly implied.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
Yep.
I think it's a great change. I think everybody probably agrees. It's certainly not. I don't think it's controversial.
I don't think so. I think you would perhaps, that would get some that would argue, because I'm thinking of one particular brother that does follow me on X, and I know he's quite fond of the previous reading, and he's
Mhm.
not fond of updates. Now,
Yeah.
I think he would freely admit though that he is. It's not that this revision is altering anything, and he would even admit, yeah, it probably does make it clearer. I think his main argument is we don't need to make it any clearer. It was already explicitly clear in the first place. So his main argument wouldn't even be against the how it reads. It would be more just it was fine the way it was. But like that's a different argument altogether. So
Yeah, I don't think scholarship has changed on this.
no,
So that's where it's like I hope they just stick with this and keep this forever. At this point, I mean, I think we know everything we're going to know.
mm-hmm.
The conclusion is uncertain, not unknown, but uncertain.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that's a fair, based on all of the data, that's a fair rendering. Um, One more that I was wanting to look at, but if you want us to
mm-hmm.
go back on anything, or if anybody has a question about any of
I'm
these,
just looking at my notes. Yeah, just while
I'm
you're
going to
doing
go
that.
back to the final. I think it's the final verse that they have in this document,
Oh, you're going to the one I
Revelation
wanted. So
13:8.
perfect.
And all who dwell on earth will worship it, and everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Before it said, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world. I'm sorry, that's what's there now. I may
Yeah,
have said
yeah,
that wrong. That's what's there now.
yeah,
From the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. So from
yeah.
before to from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thoughts?
Well, I'm pro this one, but I'm going to tell you why I think this one has been perhaps one of the most controversials, at least in my circles. Um, the ESV over the years has got a lot of criticism for the fact that people call it, the reformed translation. I was trying to air quote there, but I realized I'm off camera. It's not a reformed translation, but yet it will often get that charge thrown at it. That it's
Does
got a
does the
particular.
RSV have that? Does the RSV have that? Like, do people say that about the RSV?
The
The reason I,
RSV.
the reason I'm asking is that rendering there is in the RSV, the before the foundation of the world. I agree with you. I think the
Mhm.
ESV committee is going out of their way
Yep.
but it's ironic they never put it there in the first place.
E- exactly, and this is where I'm getting at with for those who are in the reform camp, you will often hear them say a lot. The lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world.
Mm, mm, mm.
Now that it's rendered, because again, I may be wrong. So for those watching, don't take me at face value. Go check this out yourself. But I do believe in earlier translations of the ESV that it did also say from. I may be wrong with that, so double check that. However, where I'm going with this is the most reaction that I have seen to the ESV update so far has been from this particular verse and the Genesis 3. Now,
Hmm.
it's interesting because I think the reason why it upsets so many in the reform position is because they often use this that Jesus was slain before the foundation of the world, and in their mind it's almost a very chronological, as far as we can think chronologically, because obviously when we start getting into the business of eternity, I don't think our minds can quite comprehend that. As we're like, I think the text is clear whenever it says that those whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world, um, in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Now, people's names written from the foundation of the world, as were in the Reform, not the entire Reform camp, but in certain circles, I think a lot of people took the before the foundation of the world to also then include that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, and it becomes this neat little theological tie-in.
I see.
So
Yep.
this one doesn't upset me that much, but
Yep.
I do know it's upset quite a few people, especially on X. It's been a big topic of conversation. I'll put it that way. So yeah, this one doesn't bother me. I just think it's interesting. And yeah, I expect to see more debate on this particular verse.
That being said, they've essentially gone, I think, to a more literal, straightforward rendering.
Yep.
Again, I can see why people wouldn't like it if they happen to lean in a certain direction theologically, but in
Hmm.
terms of translation, it's 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 a pretty non-controversial thing, unless
Yep.
they read it into, or took a word and tried to translate it in a little bit of a dynamic way. But in
Yeah.
this case, I actually think it's pretty literal to say
Yeah, I was
from the
gonna say like
foundation of the world.
this to me is not shoehorned in at all. Like I believe
Yeah,
this is would be the most like
yeah,
whenever I say the most literal, just for the audience, I'm not meaning like woodenly literal, but like to take it at face value, it would be written from the foundation of the world.
yeah,
As where previously, whenever it says before, I think as you rightly said, Tim, like that pretty much came from the RSV, but yet the accusation that's still thrown at the ESV is that the committee has a theological bias, which I don't think so.
yeah. So does anyone? I mean, I think people had a chance if they had any questions. I think we hit on the big ones, right?
Yeah, I was looking
Yeah.
on X there as
So
well. There's been a couple of questions, not necessarily towards
yeah,
yeah questions, but saying it's good to see you on X.
cool.
Yeah, because I think a few people are finding out for the first time now that you can stream to X, which is interesting.
Yeah,
So
it's really awesome, actually. I had to bite the bullet and subscribe
yeah,
because I'm not really my X, my account or whatever it is on
yep.
X. I don't have a lot of people that are interacting with me on X. So, but you're huge on X, so
Well, I wouldn't say huge.
you're
I wouldn't say huge.
huge.
I think I probably just get involved in a little bit of controversy. But no, X is one of those platforms. It gives everyone a voice, which is good in one way, bad in another. But I think the more time you use X and the more you develop up a bit of a community there, people start interacting more. Yeah, X is just one of those places you give, or sorry, you get from it what you give in. So like, yeah, I think the
Yeah.
more active you become, the more you stream there and stuff, your
You
your
have to be
following will
you have
soon
to be
build up.
willing to garner attention that can be negative, and I tend to be very hesitant about that.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
at
can
least
also
in in short form formats. I mean, I don't mind if
yes,
I'm on a YouTube video and someone disagrees with me. Then we can talk about it. But I know
yeah.
I think what you're doing is awesome. I really admire the engagement you've been able to achieve. I
Mm.
just uh, obviously have a lot of work to do if I'm gonna have a wider platform there. I wanted to
Oh, don't worry.
mention
I'm sure.
we
I'm
got
sure some people fly over to you.
Tim Nick. I'm sorry that this is
Ah,
blocking out your face, but
oh,
Tim
that's fine.
Nichols in the. Oh, you know what? Let me just go back to this view and say hi to Tim Nichols. Hey there, Tim.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Tim. I haven't seen you in a while, brother.
So Tim Nichols has done a video on the ESV update, and he
Hmm.
is more on that side of does not like updates. I know there's quite a few out there, although a lot of you in the comments have been fine with the updates, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and Tim, kind of tongue in cheek, well, no, he was somewhat serious here. He said, "Oh, no, that's not. I'm sorry, I put the wrong." He was saying hi to Tim Nichols. Yes,
I,
he
I can
wants to
I
make.
can change my
He
name to
wants
Tim.
to make. Yeah, he wants to have three. Bound by the Bible Review. So that I don't think I know the person. I'm sorry if I'm just not recalling, but hello to you out there. But I wanted to mention too that Tim Nichols said, "Look, the not so permanent 2016 ESV, aka 25, aka." So yeah, he's given them a hard time for the
Yeah.
changes. I wanted to,
Well,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to comment on something that Nicholas has heard me give my spiel on this, so I want to give it in a moment. But go ahead. What were you thinking?
I was just going to say, like, I know if my memory recalls, we did touch on it slightly at the beginning, but I think back the most controversial update the ESV has had so far was the 2016, and it wasn't even because of the revisions. It's because they did say, okay, that's it. The text is locked. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to tamper with it. We're not going to update with it. And that was met with a lot of praise, to be honest. And then, because my memory's not great in this now, I don't. It wasn't actually that long later that then they came out and said, okay, no, we've changed their mind. The text is not going to be locked, and we will do future updates. That got some praise as well, but it got far more negative pushback and feedback, and I understand that because a lot of people do query why do updates happen, like why does it constantly update it. But hopefully what we've been able to show today, just by going through the ESV, because like other translations go through updates as well, some are locked, to be fair. KJV and KGV hasn't been touched in I don't know how many years.
Hmm.
So I do understand on both sides people that just want their text locked, they want their footnotes locked, just leave it as it is, it's perfect. Then there is the other side that's like, no, revisions are good, we need it, we're finding new evidence, we find new things that maybe enlighten how we uh perhaps, like, for example, Tim, you brought up there a while ago about the, what was it, the 7 quarts then being, oh no, it's 7.7 quarts or
Yeah.
whatever the measurement.
Right.
It's such minor things, and like hopefully going through tonight, people have seen that revisions are not that scary. And to be honest, the majority of time it is either footnotes, it's punctuation, or it's something else. And in the cases where it is, you know, so for example, the end of Revelation there and the Genesis one. Again, it's not like this has been done in secret. It's not like it's, men in a dark room with hooded cloaks and torches and they're nefariously changing the Bible. It's you can see the changes before your eyes and you can see why. And they also, Crossway, to be fair to them, they leave their email open so you can get in contact with the committee team as well if you do have any queries or questions. So like, it's all very above board. And I think, to be honest, most people just get a little bit freaked out at times about the idea of, oh, the Bible's changing when the Bible isn't actually changing.
I wonder too if some of this is related to just the natural outcome of being a very popular translation. I find it interesting the translations that get the most heat for being updated that I'm aware of
Mm,
would be the NIV
yeah,
and the ESV, which just so happen to be some of the best-selling translations. So you kind of have a target on your back when when you're really popular, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that.
yeah,
Um, but again, I want to reiterate before I give my spiel, which I do plan to give in a moment, but I want to reiterate that if people are actually reading these at church, I think if they didn't know they had different editions,
yeah.
they would very likely not even notice because we just went through a lot of them and it doesn't take that long because there's not a lot of changes and a lot of them are footnotes which you're not even going to notice in church.
Most people don't even read footnotes.
True.
Yeah,
So my thoughts, and I've been, this has been bottled up inside of me. I've been wanting to say this online, make it public. When it comes to this issue, here is what I was really thinking when I really had the wheels turning about translation updates. And I'd love if people have thoughts on this. I know you already have thoughts, but I hope this is helpful. But my way of thinking is that if you put yourself in the shoes of the publisher, okay, and that's hard for us to do, but put yourself in, you're a Bible publisher. Really, you have three options. Try to get that on camera. Three options. The first is to have long periods of time between updates. A lot of people I hear say that's what you should do. We're talking 25, 30, 40, 50 years, and then you can do an update. There have been translations that have done that. And this is where I try to be logical and look at, like, what are the outcomes? Not what do you think would happen, but what actually happens. There's this translation called the NASB that was really liked, and they waited a long time to do an update. And they've done this before, 1977 to 95, and then from 95 to 2020. And every
Mm-hmm.
time they've done an update, you'll still hear people say, "I used the previous edition." I'm actually pretty sure you're a previous edition NASB guy, right?
I am, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
actually you changed my mind from being negative on the 2020. No, it's still not my favorite,
It's
but you
not your
changed my
favorite, yeah.
mind from being negative on it to
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah. So what I think it does in practice is it divides your user base. Even the NRSV, which came out in 1989, then they did the NRSV UE. I heard the same thing. People are like, the NRSV is better than the UE. By the time you make changes, and of course the NIV, 84 versus 2011, wow,
Yeah.
that really divided the user base. So by the time you make those changes, they're so vast, they're so noticeable that it divides your user base. And I can see why publishers don't want that to happen. The NASB seems to have, kind of come to terms with it and said, we'll just, we'll cater to all the user bases, but they
Yeah.
have a divided user base. So then another option is to update often. Now, the problem is what people have been complaining about. The text isn't stable. The text isn't stable. And I admit that that's the perception, and it can be annoying to think that, but you've looked at them today. Everybody's seen here how when you update often, you actually don't have to make major changes. You can just do tweaks and minor changes a little at a time. And that creates actually a more continuous experience for the users. You notice actually that even with the NLT, nobody is like, oh, the NLT, whatever the latest edition is, 2016, is so much worse than the 96, the original one. Nobody even notices. And the same with the ESV. It's actually in practice, the user base is unified and there's continuity to the translation, but it is annoying. And
Mm.
I can understand, people, they don't like an unstable text is what they're saying. So that leads to one other option, which maybe everybody's thinking about this. Just don't ever update, ever. And what happens, again, I'm talking about outcomes. What actually happens? What happens is translations, quicker than you think, become obsolete and displaced. The ASV, that's 100 years ago. Well, now it is 120 years. I get that.
Mm.
But even the RSV, which was the 1950s, that's not even 100. I mean, that's 75 years ago, uh, when it was first printed. And the RSV is not used very much. It's not even that old, and yet it's become obsolete. And the KJV, which had incredible staying power and influence, and is still used. I like the King James version, but in terms of practical usage for a lot of people, it is obsolete. So that's what happens if you don't ever update. And it happens quicker than you think. Even going back to the NASB came out in 77. And by 1995, they really needed to update the language. Changes do take place. Now, I think the comeback to this is going to be language doesn't change that quickly. I told you this was a spiel. So I even have an answer for that.
Go for it.
Here's what I was thinking. Gradual change, like language, is the hardest change to detect. Think about aging. I mean, I look at myself every day. I don't see any changes, but if I look at myself from 20 years ago, I realize, wow, I've changed a lot. And I think that's how language changes. But
Mhm.
also, another complicating factor is that when it comes to language, you don't just have one generation alive at a time. you have multiple generations. And so an older generation, let's say, my age and up, I know certain words that were used a certain way when I was young that are not used the same way anymore. But the younger generation, it's it's interesting because I'm still alive. I can still hear the word both ways, but the younger generation can only hear it one way.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at? So
Hmm.
that really complicates the issue. So someone asked, is there even one word in a modern translation that's changed meaning in the last 40 years or so? And the word I came up with was awesome. Because to be honest, in 40, 50 years ago, you could say awesome and it could still mean it invokes awe and
Oh.
fear.
Hmm.
But now, for young people especially, it's really hard to get them to have a sense of fear when you say awesome,
Yeah,
because the word is just used so casually.
it's
So
a good thing. Yeah.
language does change gradually, but quicker than you might think. Um, so I think even though I could say more, I've preached enough on this topic for now. So anyway, I wanted to get that off my chest. Those are my honest thoughts, everybody. But I think
Yep.
whenever you're getting upset about this, just remember the publishers only have so many options. They can either update regularly, update every 25, 40, 50 years and deal with the consequences of that, or let their translation become obsolete. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. You put that to me a couple of days ago too, because
Yeah.
uh, I'm not against regular updates. I am sometimes skeptical of updates. Um, but one thing that genuinely does annoy me is whenever people treat it like it's some type of like conspiracy theory that scripture's been changed, bit by bit. And it's like, if it was being changed bit by bit, you would be able to track the changes over time, but you're seeing that it's not actually grand scale changes. It's often things like punctuation and things like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're affirm or you're okay with what I'm saying. I actually see Tim Nichols um, makes a point here, and I don't know if he's disagreeing with me, but he does say that issues education context tells you the meaning if you have the ability to read any literature at all. Now, it's possible I'm missing a conversation here, and I apologize, Tim, if I am. But
Hmm.
another thing I would add is that the Bible translation that we use is not the original writing. It's a translation. And we do tend to think of the Bible translation as a historical document. But it's actually the original writings that are the historical documents. And that's what I think is confusing. Like when you read the King James, it feels like you're reading the Bible because the Bible's history,
Mm.
right? But really, the King James is a translation from a certain time, but the historical documents are actually the original writings. So I think it merits updating translations. But here's my caveat: I like some translations to be what I call historic translations that intentionally try to retain a literary quality that isn't trying to be the most current thing. I think that's valid. I
Hmm.
think the New King James does that,
Yeah.
and I think it's awesome. But I don't want every translation to have to be historic. I think there's another approach, which is let's stay current, let's stay
Mm.
up to date, and I think that's what the ESV is trying to do. So in the comments, if anybody has any questions, I think I don't want to run the risk of beating a dead horse, so I better quiet here.
I'm just going to check X here as well, just see if there's any further. Just people sharing it and people watching it, but no questions. A couple of questions for me personally, but I'm not going to read those out.
Okay, and I'm getting called out by Nichols. I missed two previous comments, so maybe what I just said has nothing to do with what you were talking about, but
Yeah.
it is something that I notice. People think we expect people to just the King James people say that. They're like, well, just learn how to read it. And it's like,
Mm.
the King James isn't the original document. It's just a translation. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
It's I notice it. Like I work with a lot of younger men, um, and yes, you can say it's an education thing. I would actually agree with Tim Nichols there. Like I think you can sit down and
yeah,
learn what the KJV means. You can have a dictionary beside you. I agree, and I actually read the KJV a lot. I won't read the Psalms out of anything other than the KJV. But that's just my personal choice. But working with some of those young men, maybe it's a sad reflection of where education and literary standards are today. But I do know even a lot of those young men struggle with the ESV in certain words, and they actually prefer to read the CSB. So and I actually think the CSB is a really good translation.
yeah. And this is a hard thing. You said young men.
Yeah, so like I work normally like with guys that are maybe like 19 to about 27.
I This is a hard thing. Like, we it's very hard to put yourself in the mind of someone who's not your age. It doesn't matter what age you are.
Yep.
And even like how you hear words. I mean, I can read masculine language and be like, well, of course it's referring to everybody. How could you not think, like, if you read brothers, how could you
Mhm.
not just say, okay, yeah, maybe that means everybody?
Yeah.
But younger people, you know, and there's a certain amount of that education can do. Uh, but I think part of it is like, why do we write music with the words that we use today? It's because it speaks to your heart immediately when you hear it. And every
Yeah.
generation has language that speaks to their heart. And I think even in Christian circles that we utilize that we want to have. But can you continue to use old hymns? Of course. That's why I said I think having a both and approach. I like historic translations, teaching people how to read them.
Hmm.
But I don't personally think we should demand every translation to never change. I think it's perfectly valid for a publisher to say, nope, we want to keep speaking to the most current generations. You know,
Yeah.
the
I
LSB, I
think.
mean, sorry, the CSB, that is
Mm,
a very, very good one.
yeah. And I think, especially in the English language, like we have a glut of translations. Now, some translations are bad, and I would argue aren't even translations, but like that's a topic for another day. But we have so many good translations of the Bible in English that there really is something for everyone. So if you are King James preferred, King James only, whatever, great. You can have your King James, you can use it. You've guys like me who love reading out of the NASB 95. You've got your LSB guys, your CSB women as well. And you see, look now, even I'm using the guys and the women. But I, I just think we know what goes into making a good translation, and we know what makes a translation faithful. I think sometimes we maybe just have traditional or theological bias to where it's like, no, this is the translation and you can't touch it. As where, and I'm not harping on at the KJV only side, but like there's a reason why in most KJV only publishers they will not publish the translator to the readers. It's because the translators did not actually agree. Obviously, they didn't even know of that position, but they expected further updates to come. So
Yes, I know. It is good to see, though. I think in church Bible publishers' Bibles, they've included the translators to the reader. So I
oh,
give
okay, I
them.
didn't know they'd updated that because I know before they didn't, or maybe that's because there was a split. There's also local church Bible publishers as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have some church Bible publishers' Bibles, and I think they do include the the note to the readers. And so that, yeah, I think that's great. You're right. That's good if they will do that. But a lot of King James versions don't have that. By the way, it's amazing to see our audience has actually kind of continued to grow, even though we've been on here for quite a while.
Yeah.
So I know
Hmm.
some of it's just people coming in and out, but I want to just
That's
say
still
one
good
more
though.
time to the new people. We are doing this giveaway this week. So I will email everyone. I will email the winner, not everyone. I'll email the winner uh, a week from
Congratulations, you have
a
them
week.
on.
I have a lot of people to email. So here it is. Just email at a fresh perspective at gmail.com and write ESV New Testament in the subject line. I always tell people for these giveaways, you don't need to write a message. If you want to, I'm fine with that.
Hmm.
I don't have a lot of time to respond to everybody, but feel free to, just
Yeah,
put ESV New Testament in the subject line, and that'll be we'll announce a winner. We'll email the winner a week from today as I'm recording this. And then we're going to do NASB giveaway next. I got
yes.
an NASB 95 for next time. And we're going to talk about, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be something juicy, something controversial, probably. Someone
Ooh,
asked
we have a couple of
earlier
things.
if you are Irish, and I did confirm in the comments that you are
Yeah.
indeed Irish.
Yeah.
So like one of the topics is, have you ever in Ireland, are there any Catholics there?
Oh, yeah. Ireland. Yeah, Ireland's massively,
Just a
massively
few,
Catholic.
just a few.
Just a
So,
few.
one of the topics that I think we will hit on at some point will be um, Protestant versus Catholic views of things. I know you've dealt with that on
Oh,
your,
yeah, that doesn't get me in trouble at all.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, hey, that's why we're doing this, because we want
Yeah,
to talk
absolutely.
about, yeah, and we're going to talk about Twitter drama,
Hmm.
because or X drama we have to call it now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody has topics, feel free to email those as well to a first perspective at gmail.com if you have topic
Mhm.
ideas. We
Yeah,
really appreciate you sticking with us for close to an hour and a half here. And thank you all for your attention and your interaction in the live chat. It was awesome. And again, I want to thank Nicholas for spending this time with us. And
my pleasure.
I,
Great to
I
be
I
back
I
on.
actually consider this thing. We haven't come up with a name for this. Maybe we will. But this
Yeah.
this series of shows that we're doing, I consider us co-hosts here. So
Hmm.
we're doing this together. But thank you everybody, and I appreciate your irenic attitude that everybody has had during this whole conversation. So with that, I'll let the audience go, and we'll hopefully see you again as soon as next week. We'll see what happens, but I think hopefully next week we'll do this. Goodbye,
Sounds good.
everyone.
God bless, guys.